Imagine for a moment, you're uploading a really critical business document, maybe making a big online purchase, or, even just logging into your personal email. In these everyday moments, how do you really know that the information you're sending is genuinely yours? That it hasn't been like subtly altered somewhere along the way, or that it's being securely stored, safe from, well, prying eyes?
Hmm.
We often take this kind of digital trust completely for granted, don't we? But beneath the surface, there's this foundational technology making it all possible. Today on the deep dive, we're going to pull back the curtain on that unsung hero, the silent guardian working tirelessly behind, well, pretty much every digital interaction you have. We're talking about the secure hash algorithm, or SHA. It's a family of cryptographic hash functions that are absolutely critical to maintaining the integrity and authenticity of our hyperconnected world. Our mission in this deep dive is basically to give you a shortcut to understanding this complex but really vital piece of cybersecurity. We'll unpack what SHA is, why it's not just important, but frankly indispensable, how it works its magic, from its origins right up to its cutting edge innovations, and what its future looks like, especially with quantum threats on the horizon. Get ready to understand the digital glue that holds our secure online world together.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here is how these algorithms provide the very um, bedrock of digital trust. They transform any piece of data, doesn't matter how vast or small, into this like unforgeable digital fingerprint. This unique fingerprint is essential for, well, everything we do online, from securing our sensitive communications to just verifying the integrity of our financial transactions.
Yeah.
Without this underlying layer of trust, I mean, the digital economy and, frankly, much of our online existence as we know it, it just couldn't function.
Okay, so let's start with the absolute core. We've used this phrase digital fingerprint. What exactly is this digital fingerprint and, how is it created?
Right. So at its heart, a cryptographic hash function is a deterministic mathematical algorithm. What that means is it takes any input message, could be anything, any size, any format, and it consistently crunches it down into a unique fixed size output string. This output is what we call a cache value, or a digest, sometimes a message digest. The key thing is it's always the same output for the same input every single time.
That consistency, that deterministic part, that's clearly crucial for verification, right? But what makes it a secure hash function beyond just creating a unique output? What are its like non-negotiable characteristics?
That's where the really cryptographic properties come in. First, as you hinted, it absolutely must be deterministic. Same input always yields the same exact output. No variability, no randomness. That's fundamental for reliably checking if data has been messed with. Second, and this is foundational, it has to be a one-way function. It needs to be irreversible.
Yeah.
It's incredibly easy, computationally speaking, to get the hash from the input message, but it's practically like computationally impossible to go the other way to reverse engineer the original input message from the hash value. Think of it like a perfectly mixed smoothie, easy to blend it all up, right? But trying to separate the strawberries from the banana from the yogurt back out, effectively impossible. And that's a critical distinction from encryption. Encryption is meant to be two-way encrypt, then decrypt. With hashing, it's strictly a one-way street. That's the design.
That's a great analogy, the smoothie analogy. So the one-way street means it's inherently designed not to be reversed.
Okay.
But what happens if I change just one tiny little detail in the original message? Does the hash just like adjust a tiny bit, or does it completely invalidate it?
That's where the avalanche effect comes into play. And this is a truly critical property. Even a tiny, tiny change, like a single bit flip in the input, imagine changing just one character in a huge document, will result in a drastically different, completely unpredictable, and totally unrecognizable hash output. It's not like a slight adjustment, it's a total transformation. This makes even the most subtle tampering instantly detectable because the slightest tweak makes the digital fingerprint entirely new.
Okay, that's a really strong defense against alteration. What about the possibility, maybe it sounds impossible, but could an attacker find two completely different inputs that, just by some crazy fluke, produce the exact same hash?
That brings us to collision resistance. And that's a huge one. It must be computationally infeasible, meaning practically impossible with current and foreseeable computing power to find two different inputs that produce the exact same hash value. If an attacker could do that, they could, for example, get you to digitally sign a totally benign contract, right? And then later swap it out for a malicious one that somehow magically has the exact same hash. Your system would check the signature, see the hashes match, and say, yep, looks good, even though the document is now something dangerous. Preventing that is absolutely paramount for cryptographic security. And building on that one-way property, we also demand pre-image resistance. Basically, given just a hash value, it should be impossible to find the original input message that created it. This is super important for protecting things like stored password hashes. Then there's also second preimage resistance. This means, given an input and its hash, it must be impossible to find a second different input that produces that same hash. All these properties together, they make cryptographic hashes these incredibly formidable tools for building and maintaining digital trust.
Okay, so with those really critical properties in mind, how did this foundational attack, the secure hash algorithm family, actually come about? Who developed it, and what was the main goal?
Right. So the SHA family wasn't just, thought up in someone's garage. It was developed by NIST, that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they worked in close collaboration with the NSA, the National Security Agency. Its design then goes through this rigorous standardization process under U.S. Federal Information Processing Standards, or FIPS. And these FIPS standards often become requirements, especially for federal government applications, and that naturally influences wider industry adoption. It effectively sets the bar, for secure hashing practices across the board.
So a very rigorous government-backed origin. And its primary purpose, what was the main job it was designed for?
SHA's main job, fundamentally, is to ensure data integrity, like, has this data been changed since it was created or sent? Also, authenticity, is this data truly from the person or system it claims to be from? And non-repudiation, which means can the sender later deny that they actually sent this message or document? These are all essential proofs you need in the digital world, and they support countless cryptographic applications that really form the backbone of our online lives.
Why is SHA truly indispensable then in our modern digital lives? Why should we, as informed individuals listening to this, care deeply about this tech beyond just the technical details?
Because honestly, without SHA or very similar functions, the entire structure of digital trust would just crumble. It would collapse. Imagine a world where you couldn't be sure that a file you downloaded hadn't been infected with malware, or that the website you're putting your credit card details into is actually your bank and not some imposter site, or that your private online communications are actually private. That lack of trust would lead to, well, chaos, widespread fraud, systemic failures, and ultimately an unusable digital economy.
And it's really crucial to understand that SHA goes way beyond just simple error detection, right? We've had basic checksums like CRC's, cyclic redundancy checks, for ages. They're okay for catching accidental errors, maybe like a glitch during a download. But are they enough to stop someone deliberately messing with the data?
Oh, not at all. CRCs are, frankly, easily fooled by intentional modifications. A determined attacker could, with relatively little effort, craft a malicious version of a file that produces the exact same CRC as the original benign one. SHA, on the other hand, provides the heavy-duty cryptographic strength needed for real security against malicious intent. It's specifically designed to withstand intelligent adversarial attacks. And the real-world need, the urgency for these robust hashing mechanisms, it's only accelerating. I mean, just consider the sheer data explosion we're living through. You've got the Internet of Things streaming constant data, massive cloud infrastructures, global networks exchanging petabytes, zettabytes of information daily. We're swimming in digital content. SHA helps ensure that this vast flowing river of data remains trustworthy, reliable, regardless of its sheer volume or how many different systems it passes through.
And it's not just the volume, it's the sensitivity too. Regulatory compliance has become a huge driver here, hasn't it? Standards like GDPR in Europe, iPay for healthcare in the US, PCI DSS for payment cards, these aren't just suggestions anymore. They legally mandate secure hashing for protecting sensitive information. So for any company handling customer data, whether it's health records, financial details, personal info, using strong hashing isn't optional. It's a legal and ethical requirement, and the penalties for getting it wrong can be severe.
Absolutely. And we've seen, unfortunately, firsthand, the catastrophic results when hashing isn't strong enough or just poorly implemented. That 2012 LinkedIn password leak is still a really stark reminder. Millions of user passwords protected only by unsalted MD5, hashes MD5, is a much weaker predecessor to SHA. They were compromised. Attackers were able to reverse engineer a huge number of those passwords, not just because MD5 itself was weak, but critically because the lack of salting, which we'll get into, made them vulnerable to super fast brute force and dictionary attacks using these pre-computed tables. SHA, when it's implemented correctly with modern best practices like salting and stretching, helps mitigate these kinds of devastating breaches much more effectively.
Right. So SHA isn't just protecting data and storage. It's the very foundation for many of the secure protocols we use every single day, often without even thinking about it. We're talking about that little padlock icon in your browser, right? That signifies HTTPS for secure web browsing, or SSH for securely logging into remote servers. And IPsec, which powers a lot of virtual private networks, VPNs. These critical services, they just wouldn't be secure without SHA working diligently under the hood.
Exactly. And finally, we're in this constant battle against evolving threats. Computing power just keeps growing exponentially. You've got more powerful GPUs, custom hardware like ASICs. The computational strength available to attackers increases dramatically over time. This forces a continuous evolution of our cryptographic tools. Stronger hashes, like the newer SHA-3 standard, are developed proactively. It's about preventing future vulnerabilities and maintaining a robust defense against ever more sophisticated cyber threats, trying to stay one step ahead.
So, what does this all boil down to for you, the listener? It means SHA is kind of the silent guardian of your digital life. It's verifying everything from your casual cat videos, maybe, to your most sensitive bank transactions. It's the invisible trust layer just sitting there beneath the surface, making sure that what you send, what you see, and what you receive online is authentic and hasn't been tampered with.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, SHA isn't just some obscure technical detail. It's a really critical component in this ongoing arms race of cybersecurity. It's constantly evolving, pushing the boundaries of secure design, always trying to stay ahead of increasingly sophisticated threats. It ensures the very foundation of our digital interactions remains secure and trustworthy. It's a real testament to the dynamic nature of security itself, where, frankly, complacency is just not an option.
We often talk about an arms race in cybersecurity, right? This constant push and pull between the people building the defenses and the people trying to bleed through them. And the history of the SHA family, it's not like a perfect illustration of exactly that dynamic.
Mhm.
How has this family of algorithms had to constantly evolve and adapt just to stay relevant and, more importantly, secure?
That's precisely the right way to think about it. Cryptographic security is never like a fixed destination you arrive at. It's always a moving target. And NIST's role in this whole evolution is absolutely pivotal. They don't just, suggest algorithms. Their fifth standards often become requirements, especially for U.S. federal applications, and that heavily influences what the wider industry adopts. So the progression from SHA-0 to SHA-1, then SHA-2, now SHA-3. It's a clear story of this dynamic interplay between cryptographic design, new cryptanalytic breakthroughs, ways to attack the algorithms, and the urgent need for standardized, battle-tested solutions that everyone can rely on.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning then. With SHA-0 and the swift retirement of SHA-1, SHA-0, the very first version, came out in 1993. It was a 160-bit algorithm, but it was withdrawn almost immediately. What happened there? What was the lesson?
Yeah, SHA-0 was pulled back very, very quickly due to an undisclosed but apparently quite significant flaw found shortly after publication. This rapid withdrawal really underscored a crucial lesson right from the start. Even the smallest vulnerability in a core cryptographic building block like a hash function can have huge implications. It demands an immediate, decisive response. It really highlighted the critical need for meticulous design and super rigorous scrutiny before something gets widely deployed. Its successor, SHA-1, which came out in 1995, was basically a direct modification of SHA-0, fixing that initial flaw. It also produced a 160-bit digest. And for over a decade, SHA-1 became the workhorse. It was incredibly widely adopted, especially for use with the digital signature algorithm. It really did secure countless digital interactions during its time.
But then came the slow, sort of inevitable decline and fall of SHA-1. By 2005, cryptanalysts, the codebreakers, had advanced their techniques. Theoretical vulnerabilities started appearing. They showed that collision attacks finding two inputs with the same hash were becoming significantly easier than they should be for a 160-bit hash. It wasn't a practical attack yet, but it was like a big warning sign flashing, right? Telling everyone SHA-1's days were numbered.
Precisely. That theoretical groundwork led NIST to formally deprecate SHA-1 back in 2011. They explicitly disallowed its use for digital signatures by federal agencies by the end of 2013. But the final, definitive nail in the coffin, the moment everyone realized it was truly broken for practical purposes, came in February 2017. That's when a collaboration between CWI Amsterdam and Google announced they had successfully performed a practical collision attack. They actually created two different PDF files that produced the exact same SHA-1 hash. It wasn't theory anymore. This was real.
And this wasn't just some academic exercise, right? It had huge, immediate implications. It meant an attacker could potentially get a user to digitally sign a perfectly harmless document, and then, without the user knowing or the system detecting anything wrong, secretly swap that document for a malicious one that just happened to yield the same SHA-1 hash. For digital signatures, where uniqueness is everything, this made SHA-1 absolutely irrevocably broken.
Exactly. And the industry response was, thankfully, swift and decisive. Following this practical collision, all the major web browser vendors, Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Safari, immediately stopped accepting SSL certificates signed using SHA-1. That effectively marked the end of SHA-1's viability for almost all secure applications. It made it crystal clear that once a cryptographic primitive is demonstrably broken for its primary purpose, migrating away isn't just advisable, it's absolutely mandatory.
It's a really crucial learning moment, though. Security is always context-dependent. Because while SHA-1 is totally broken for digital signatures, we still see it used in some niche places, like in Git, the version control system lots of developers use. How can that possibly be safe?
That's an excellent point, and it highlights the nuances here. Git does use SHA-1, primarily for data integrity identifying file versions and commits. But critically, Git has additional safeguards built in. Its security doesn't rely solely on SHA-1's collision resistance in the same way a digital signature does. It uses SHA-1 as part of a larger system that makes malicious substitution much harder. So it's a powerful example. An algorithm can be broken for one critical use case, but with careful system design and extra controls, it might still be acceptable, though maybe not ideal, for another less demanding purpose. But you wouldn't build a new system with it today.
Okay, so as SHA-1 was clearly on its way out, what was the cryptographic community doing proactively to make sure we didn't end up in a security crisis?
That leads us right to the dominance of SHA-2. Introduced by the NSA way back in 2001, SHA-2 was a genuinely proactive development. It came out around the time that brute force attacks against SHA-1's 160-bit output were starting to look feasible with advancing computer power. So SHA-2 was a strategic move to provide a much more robust standard before SHA-1 actually broke completely. It was about preempting a crisis, not just reacting to one.
And SHA-2 isn't just one single algorithm, right? It's actually a whole family offering different output lengths.
Exactly right. It's a collection. You've got SHA-224, SHA-256, SHA-384, SHA-512, and even some truncated versions like SHA-512224 and SHA-512256. These different output lengths give developers flexibility. They can choose the security level that makes sense for their application, balancing performance needs against cryptographic strength. The real workhorse of this family, the one you probably encounter most often, is SHA-256. It produces a 256-bit output. Internally, SHA-256 uses 32-bit words and runs through 64 rounds of complex operations. SHA-512 uses larger 64-bit words and 80 rounds. But despite these differences, their core internal structures are very similar, and they're both built upon that well-established Merkle-Damgård structure we mentioned earlier.
And crucially, as of today, 2025, SHA-2, especially SHA-256 and SHA-512 remains the industry standard, correct? It's still considered secure.
That's absolutely right. As of now, there are no known practical breaks against these main SHA-2 versions. They continue to be widely trusted, widely deployed in critical systems all over the world. They are robust, performant, and the current standard.
But the innovation didn't stop there. NIST then kicked off another public competition, this one starting around 2007, which eventually led to this revolutionary shift to SHA-3, published in 2015. What's really fascinating here is that SHA-3 was not developed because SHA-2 was broken or even showing signs of weakness, so why go through such a massive effort if the existing standard was still strong?
This was a really brilliant, forward-thinking, strategic move by NIST. Cryptographers often call this kind of thing an insurance policy. NIST's decision wasn't about replacing a broken algorithm. It was about providing algorithmic diversity. They wanted to ensure that our overall cryptographic toolkit was resilient against any future, perhaps completely unforeseen, breakthroughs that might compromise the entire Merkle-Damgård family of algorithms. Remember, that includes both the broken SHA-1 and the currently secure SHA-2. SHA-3, which is based on an algorithm called KEKAK, is fundamentally different. It's like having a backup plan that relies on completely different principles. If some subtle flaw was ever found in the whole Merkle-Damgård approach, we wouldn't be left scrambling. We'd have SHA-3 ready to go. It's a hedge against systemic failure.
And the way SHA-3 works internally is radically different too, using something called a sponge construction, completely moving away from that iterative block-by-block Merkle-Damgård design.
Precisely. It's a fundamental architectural shift. The SHA-3 family includes the expected fixed-length functions, SHA-3-224, SHA-3-256, SHA-3-384, SHA-3-512. But what's really innovative are its extendable output functions, or XOFs, like SHA-128 and SHA-256. These XOFs are amazing because they can produce a hash output of any desired length. You're not stuck with just 256 bits or 512 bits. You need 1,000 bits or 128 bits. SHA can do that. This offers incredible flexibility for different kinds of cryptographic applications, a big advantage over the fixed-length outputs of SHA-1 and SHA-2.
So when you look at the whole story of SHA, from its flawed start with SHA-0 through the workhorse SHA-1, the robust SHA-2, and now the innovative SHA-3, it's really clear this isn't just about static algorithms. It's a story about a dynamic arms race, forcing continuous evolution and constant innovation.
And this raises a really important question for all of us involved in security or even just using technology. How do we design for security in a world where we know vulnerabilities are, to some extent, inevitable? SHA-3's development offers a powerful answer: bet on diversity. It acknowledges that having fundamentally different designs based on different mathematical assumptions is our best defense against unforeseen cryptanalytic breakthroughs. It's kind of an admission that no single design, no matter how clever, is guaranteed to be infallible forever. True long-term resilience comes from having multiple, distinct, robust options available in our cryptographic toolbox.
Okay, we've talked a lot about the why hashing is important, why SHA evolved, and the property like one-wayness and collision resistance. Now let's try to get a glimpse behind the curtain. What's actually happening, at least at a high level, when SHA-256 or SHA-3 takes our data and crunches it down into that unique digital fingerprint. We don't need to track every single bit flipping, obviously, but getting a conceptual feel for these different architectures, Merkle-Damgård versus sponge, is really illuminating, isn't it?
Absolutely. Understanding the basic mechanics gives you a much deeper appreciation for the security they provide. It's not just, waving a magic wand. It's meticulous engineering built on really rigorous mathematical principles. Let's start with SHA-256, since it's so common and it really exemplifies that Merkle-Damgård structure. Everything begins with input preparation, or pre-processing. Your message, whatever it is, first needs to be made into a very specific size format that the algorithm can handle. This involves padding. First, you append a single 1 bit to the end of your message. Then you add a whole string of 0 bits until the total length of the message is exactly 64 bits short of being a multiple of 512 bits. This padding ensures the message fits perfectly into the algorithm's fixed-size 512-bit processing blocks. And finally, you append a 64-bit block that represents the length of the original message before you added any padding. This pre-processing step is crucial. It makes sure the input is uniformly sized and helps prevent certain types of attacks.
Okay, so the message gets padded and the length gets added. It's prepped. What happens next to actually kick off the hashing process?
Right, next comes the initialization stage. The algorithm sets up 8 32-bit initial hash values, often labeled H0 through H7. These are like the starting point for the calculation. It also initializes 64 round constants, K0 through K63. Now, these values aren't random or secret. They're derived in very specific, publicly known ways, often from the fractional parts of the square roots or cube roots of the first few prime numbers. This transparency is important. Cryptographers call them nothing-up-my-sleeve numbers. It signals that the designers didn't hide any secret constants that could potentially create a backdoor. Everything is open and verifiable. Then comes the real heart of the operation, the compression function. You can think of this as the mixing machine. It's an iterative process. Each 512-bit block of your prepared message gets processed one by one through 64 intensive rounds. In each of these 64 rounds, a complex series of bitwise operations, things like ND or XOR, NOT, plus modular addition and various bit shifts and rotations are meticulously applied. These operations mix together the current message block data, the round constants, and 8 working variables, which start as copies of the initial hash values. Crucially, the output of one round feeds directly into the input of the next round. This creates this highly intricate mixing and transformation of the data. This cascading effect is how that powerful avalanche effect is achieved. A tiny change at the very beginning rapidly spreads and creates complete chaos, leading to a totally different result by the end of the 64 rounds.
It sounds incredibly thorough, that mixing process, but I remember you mentioned earlier that this Merkle-Damgård structure, despite its efficiency and how well it works, does have a known vulnerability. Can you explain that length extension attack again, briefly?
Yes, you're right to bring that up again. It's an inherent property of the Merkle-Damgård construction. Because the process is iterative, block by block, the internal state of the hash function, those working variables, at the end of processing the original message is effectively the final hash output. This means if an attacker knows a hash H key message, they can use that hash value as the starting internal state, append new data, a suffix, and continue the hashing process to correctly compute H key message suffix without knowing the secret key. They can essentially extend the message and calculate a valid hash for the longer message. This is why, for secure message authentication codes, MACs, where you often hash a secret key along with the message, we don't just use plain SHA-2, we use a special construction called HMAC, hash-based message authentication code. HMAC uses the key twice in both an inner and outer hash, specifically to prevent this length extension vulnerability.
Okay, so that's the established approach with SHA-256, the Merkle-Damgård structure with HMAC for certain uses. How does SHA-3, with its completely different sponge construction, fundamentally change this game and address some of these architectural issues like length extension?
SHA-3 represents a total departure from Merkle-Damgård.
Yeah.
It uses this sponge construction, and the metaphor is actually quite helpful. Think of it like a sponge. It first absorbs the input data, and then it can be squeezed to get the output hash. It's a fundamentally different way of thinking about building a hash function, and it was designed from the ground up with the lessons learned from Merkle-Damgård in mind, aiming to avoid known weaknesses like length extension. It operates in two distinct phases. First, there's the absorbing phase. The input message is broken into blocks, and these blocks are XORed into a specific portion of the sponge's very large internal state. It's 1600 bits wide in the standard SHA-3 instances. Critically, after each block is absorbed, a complex permutation function called the Keccak permutation, or Keccak F1600, is applied to the entire 1600-bit internal state. This thoroughly mixes everything up inside the sponge.
All right, so it absorbs all the input, mixing it into this big internal state. What happens then to get the actual hash output?
Once all the input has been absorbed, the process moves to the squeezing phase. To get the hash output, the algorithm repeatedly extracts a certain number of bits from a portion of the internal state. After each extraction, that same Keccak permutation function is applied again to the internal state, mixing it further before the next extraction. This process continues squeeze, permute, until the desired output length, like 256 bits for SHA-3 has been produced. And that Keccak permutation function itself is the real computational engine here. It's a meticulously designed 24-round process. Each round involves 5 distinct steps. Cryptographers call them theta, rho, pi, chi, iota, consisting of intricate bitwise operations, rotations, and logical transformations across the entire 1600-bit state. This ensures incredibly thorough mixing and diffusion of information within the state, making it extremely difficult to analyze or reverse engineer the relationship between the input, the internal state, and the output.
Okay, so if we sort of compare these two architectures side by side, Merkle-Damgård for SHA-2 versus the sponge for SHA-3. What are the core takeaways? What are the fundamental differences in their design philosophies and the resulting security benefits of the newer sponge approach?
It really highlights a crucial design philosophy trade-off. SHA-2's Merkle-Damgård structure is very efficient, especially for streaming data, because you can process it block by block as it arrives. That's a big plus for many applications. However, that efficiency comes at the cost of exposing its final internal state, which directly leads to that length extension vulnerability we discussed. SHA-3, using the sponge construction, makes a different choice. It prioritizes hiding that internal state. The squeezing phase deliberately obscures the final state from which the hash is derived. This makes it fundamentally inherently resistant to attacks like length extension right out of the box. It might be slightly less performant on some standard CPUs without specific hardware acceleration compared to SHA-2, but it gains a significant security advantage. So it raises that important question for designers. What's the optimal balance between raw speed and inherent resilience against certain classes of attack for your specific application, especially when you consider potential future threats? SHA-3 offers a different answer to that question.
All right, now that we've had that peek behind the curtain at the mechanics, the Merkle-Damgård versus the sponge, let's talk about how these seemingly abstract mathematical functions actually touch your digital life, like every single day. Because these aren't just theoretical ideas locked away in cryptography papers. They are practical tools that underpin a massive amount of our secure online world. Where do we see SHA in action?
Indeed. Probably the most fundamental yet incredibly powerful use of SHA is simply ensuring data integrity and authenticity. Think of the hash again as that unique digital fingerprint. By simply computing the hash of a file or a message before you send it or store it, and then computing it again later when you receive it or retrieve it, you can instantly tell if anything has changed. You just compare the two hashes. If they match, the data is the same. If they don't match, thanks to that avalanche effect where even one bit flip totally changes the hash, you know immediately that something's been altered. whether accidentally or maliciously.
And a perfect real-world example of that is verifying file downloads, right? This is something people can actually do themselves. When you download software, especially something important like an operating system update or maybe a security tool, you'll often see the publisher provide an SHA-256 hash right there on their website next to the download link. After your download finishes, you can use a simple tool built into most operating systems or a third-party utility to calculate the SHA-256 hash of the file you just downloaded onto your computer. If the hash you calculate perfectly matches the one the publisher provided, you can be extremely confident that the file is exactly as they intended it. It wasn't corrupted during the download, and crucially, it wasn't tampered with by some attacker trying to sneak malware onto your system. If the hashes don't match, don't run that file, delete it, something went wrong.
Exactly. Hashing also forms the absolute bedrock of digital signatures and SSL/TLS certificates. These are fundamental to secure online transactions and communication. In the world of digital signatures, think about signing a contract digitally. Instead of encrypting the entire document, which can be slow, especially for large files, what usually happens is that a hash digest of the document is created first. Then, that relatively small hash digest is encrypted using the sender's private key. This encrypted hash is the digital signature. The recipient then uses the sender's corresponding public key, which is widely available, to decrypt the hash signature. They also independently calculate their own hash of the received document. If the decrypted hash from the signature matches the hash they calculated themselves, it confirms two critical things simultaneously. First, data integrity, the document wasn't altered, and second, sender authenticity. Only the holder of that specific private key could have created that signature. This process also provides non-repudiation. The sender can't later deny signing it because only they have the private key.
And this same core principle is absolutely vital for SSL/TLS certificates. These are the things that enable secure web communications. They give you that little padlock icon in your browser address bar and the HTTPS prefix. When your browser connects to a secure website, the site presents its SSL/TLS certificate. This certificate contains the website's public key, identity information, and crucially, it's been digitally signed by a trusted third party, known as a certificate authority, or CA. Part of that signature process involves the CA using a SHA-2 function, usually SHA-256 these days, to hash the certificate file itself. That hash is then signed by the CA's private key. Your browser verifies this signature using the CA's public key, which is pre-installed in your browser or OS, and also rehashes the certificate content itself. If everything matches up, your browser trusts that the website is legitimate, establishes a secure encrypted connection, and shows you the padlock. It's this invisible handshake powered by hashing and public key crypto happening in milliseconds every time you visit a secure site.
Another absolutely crucial application, and one that impacts pretty much every single person online, is secure password storage and verification. Let's be absolutely crystal clear here. Storing user passwords in plain text, just as readable text in a database, is catastrophically bad security practice. It should never, ever be done. If a system storing plain text passwords were ever breached, attackers would instantly have the keys to potentially thousands or millions of user accounts, leading to widespread identity theft, financial fraud, you name it. It's inexcusable. This is why modern secure systems never store your actual password in its original form.
Okay, so if they don't store the password itself, what do they store? And how do they check if you entered the right one when you log in?
What they store is only a hash of your password, generated using a strong cryptographic hash function like SHA-256, or even stronger algorithms designed specifically for passwords like Argon2 or bcrypt. So when you go to log in and type your password, the system doesn't compare your typed password directly to what's stored in the database. Instead, it takes the password you just typed, runs it through the same hashing process, and generates a new hash right there on the spot. That newly generated hash is then compared to the hash value stored in the user database for your account. If and only if the two hashes match, the system knows you entered the correct password and lets you in. This means your actual password is never stored or transmitted in its original readable form after that initial hashing. Even if attackers manage to steal a database, they only get a list of hashes, not the actual passwords. This makes it much, much harder for them to compromise user accounts. And this fundamental technique of storing hashes instead of passwords is made even stronger by combining it with two absolutely critical security practices. First is salting. Salting involves adding a unique random string of characters, the salt, to each individual user's password before it gets hashed. This salt is then stored alongside the hash in the database. This is essential because it ensures that even if two users happen to choose the exact same password, like password 123, they will have different salts, and therefore their stored hashes will be completely different. This single step effectively defeats rainbow table attacks. Rainbow tables are huge pre-computed lists of hashes for common passwords. Without salts, attackers could use these tables to quickly look up the passwords corresponding to many stolen hashes. With unique salts, every hash is unique, rendering those pre-computed tables useless. Every password hash has to be cracked individually. And then, to make that individual cracking process much harder, there's key stretching, sometimes called iterative hashing. This technique involves taking the salted password and then deliberately repeating the hashing process over and over again, maybe thousands or even hundreds of thousands of times. Why would you intentionally slow down the login process like this? Because it adds a significant computational cost for everyone, including attackers. If it takes your server, say 100 milliseconds to hash a password thousands of times, which is barely noticeable to a user logging in, it forces an attacker trying to brute force billions of password possibilities to spend orders of magnitude more time and computational resources to crack just one password. It dramatically raises the cost and time required for offline brute force attacks, mitigating the speed advantage of modern GPUs and specialized cracking hardware. Salting and key stretching aren't optional extras. They are absolutely mandatory best practices for secure password storage today.
Wow. Okay, that's fascinating how those layers work together. Now, this brings us to a really compelling and maybe less immediately obvious application: blockchain technology. How does something like SHA-256 end up powering cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and enabling this whole idea of a trustless, decentralized system? Where does hashing fit into creating digital trust without a central bank or authority?
SHA-256 is, without exaggeration, the absolute heartbeat of blockchain and proof-of-work systems, with Bitcoin being the most famous example. It's the cryptographic workhorse that makes Bitcoin's consensus mechanism possible, enabling a truly trustless, decentralized ledger where no single entity is in charge. Its role in blockchain is really twofold and absolutely foundational. First, SHA-256 provides immutability. Each block in the blockchain contains, among other things, the hash of the entire preceding block. This creates a secure, backward-linking chain. If someone were to try and tamper with data in an older block, say, changing a transaction amount from years ago, it would immediately alter the hash of that block. Since the next block in the chain contains the original hash of the now altered block, the link would be broken. The altered block's new hash wouldn't match what the next block expects. This instantly invalidates the altered block and all subsequent blocks that follow it in the chain. To successfully tamper with old data, an attacker would have to recalculate the hashes for the altered block, and every single block that came after it, all the way to the present, and do it faster than the rest of the network is adding new blocks. This becomes computationally infeasible very quickly, especially on a large established blockchain like Bitcoin's. It's what makes the history effectively immutable. And the second major role is in mining and the cryptographic puzzle that underlies proof of work. Miners in a network like Bitcoin are competing to validate new transactions and be the one to add the next block to the chain. They do this by solving a difficult computational puzzle. Specifically, they take a block header, which includes the hash of the previous block, a summary of the new transactions, and a variable number called a nonce, and they repeatedly hash this block header using SHA-256. They keep changing the nonce slightly and rehashing, over and over, billions or trillions of times per second across the whole network. They're searching for a nonce value that, when hashed with the rest of the header, produces a resulting SHA-256 hash that starts with a certain number of leading 0 bits, basically, a hash value that is numerically less than a network-specified difficulty target. Finding such a hash is computationally very expensive and requires immense processing power and energy. This intense effort is a proof of work. It's intentionally difficult to find, but very easy for anyone else on the network to verify once found, just one hash calculation. The miner who finds a valid hash gets to add their block to the chain and receives a reward, newly minted coins and transaction fees. This whole process allows the network to reach consensus on the order of transactions in a decentralized way, without needing any central authority to approve them. SHA-256 is the engine driving that entire competitive consensus mechanism.
That's incredible. So just think about it. Every time you see that little lock icon on a website, every time you perhaps use a cryptocurrency, or even just log in securely to your online banking, you're directly benefiting from the power and security provided by SHA. It really is everywhere, just silently doing its critical job to keep your digital world safe, trustworthy, and functioning.
And it raises that important question again. How can something so abstract, just a mathematical function churning out bits, create so much tangible security? How does it enable these vast, complex systems like global e-commerce or decentralized finance? The answer really lies in its ability to provide that irrefutable, computationally verifiable proof of integrity and authenticity. This foundational layer of trust built on cryptographic hardness is what allows these complex digital systems to function and scale, often without needing a traditional central oversight body. It empowers a truly decentralized and remarkably secure digital ecosystem for billions of people worldwide.
Okay, so as we've clearly seen throughout this discussion, the world of hashing is one of constant evolution. It really is this ongoing arms race between the cryptographers designing these systems and the cryptanalysts trying to break them. The landscape is always shifting, and that includes dealing with newly discovered vulnerabilities in existing algorithms and even preparing for entirely new paradigms of computing, like quantum computers. So, what are the current challenges facing hashing, and what does the future hold, especially with quantum on the horizon?
That's right. The work is never truly done in cryptography. It's a field that demands constant vigilance and forward thinking. Before we look too far ahead, let's just briefly revisit some of the known vulnerabilities, just to be clear. We absolutely must reiterate that SHA-1 is cryptographically broken for any application that relies on collision resistance. That means things like digital signatures. That 2017 practical collision attack by Google and CWI Amsterdam proved to be beyond any doubt. 2 different PDF files, same SHA-1 hash. It's time for those critical applications is definitively over. Any organization still relying on SHA-1 for signatures or similar tasks needs to migrate away immediately. It's not safe.
And then there's that length extension attack, which you explained is a known vulnerability affecting algorithms built on the Merkle-Damgård structure. That includes both the broken SHA-1 and the currently secure SHA-2 family, right? Can you just give us a quick refresher on why that's a potential problem?
Certainly. It stems from the way Merkle-Damgård processes data block by block. In essence, if an attacker knows a keyed hash, like HKey message, they can actually figure out how to compute a valid hash for an extended message, HKey message attacker suffix, without knowing the secret key. They can do this because the final hash output, HKey message, essentially reveals the internal state of the hash function after processing key message. The attacker can use this revealed state as a starting point, append their own suffix, and just continue the standard hashing process from there to get a valid hash for the longer message. It's a subtle but potentially serious flaw, especially in protocols where hashes might be used for authenticating messages with a shared secret key. And as we mentioned, this is precisely why we use the HMAC construction with SHA-2 when we need a secure message. Authentication code HMAC specifically prevents this length extension trick. However, it's important to reemphasize that SHA-3, with its completely different sponge construction, is inherently resistant to this attack. The way its squeezing phase works specifically hides the internal state from the final output hash. An attacker simply cannot reconstruct the internal state from the hash and continue the process like they can with Merkle-Damgård. This architectural difference gives SHA-3 a fundamental advantage in this regard.
Okay, so putting that all together, what's the current security posture for hash functions as we stand today in 2025? What should people be using?
The clear guidance is SHA-1 is out. Do not use it for new applications requiring collision resistance, period. SHA-2, particularly SHA-256 and SHA-512, remains robust and widely trusted. It's the current workhorse standard for most applications, provided you use HMAC where appropriate to mitigate length extension. And SHA-3 is highly secure, offers that valuable algorithmic diversity, and is inherently resistant to length extension. It's an excellent choice for new implementations, providing a strong, fundamentally different alternative to SHA-2.
All right, now let's shift gears and talk about the really big elephant in the room for future cryptography, the looming quantum threat. Quantum computers aren't just faster classical computers, they operate on completely different principles. What exactly is a quantum computer at a high level, and how does it threaten our current cryptographic toolbox, including hash functions like SHA?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question facing the entire field right now. Unlike classical computers that use bits representing either 0 or 1, quantum computers use qubits. Qubits can leverage quantum phenomena like superposition and entanglement. Superposition means a qubit can represent 0, 1, or, crucially, a combination of both states simultaneously. Entanglement links qubits together in ways that have no classical counterpart. This allows quantum computers, at least theoretically, to perform certain types of calculations exponentially faster than any classical computer ever could for specific mathematical problems. The most famous and perhaps most concerning quantum algorithm is Shor's algorithm. Discovered by Peter Shor in 1994, This algorithm can efficiently factor large integers. This poses an existential threat to most of the public key cryptography we rely on today, including RSA and elliptic curve cryptography, VAC. Their security is based directly on the assumption that factoring large numbers for RSA or solving the discrete logarithm problem on elliptic curves for ECC is computationally infeasible for classical computers. SHA's algorithm breaks those assumptions. This leads to the terrifying harvest now, decrypt later scenario. Adversaries, maybe nation-states, could be capturing and storing vast amounts of encrypted internet traffic today, patiently waiting for the day they have a powerful enough quantum computer to decrypt it all using SHA's algorithm. This makes migrating our public key infrastructure into quantum-resistant alternatives incredibly urgent, especially for data that needs to remain secret for many years.
Okay, Shores is bad news for RSA and ECC, but what about hash functions like SHA? Is there a quantum algorithm that breaks them just as badly? The threat there comes from a different algorithm, Grover's algorithm, right? How does that impact hash security?
That's correct. Hash functions are threatened by a different quantum algorithm, Grover's algorithm. Grover's provides a quadratic or square root speedup for unstructured search problems. Think of searching a phone book for a name. When you only have the number classically, you might have to check half the entries on average. Grover's can find it much faster. When applied to hash functions, Grover's algorithm can speed up brute force attacks aimed at finding collisions or preimages. For finding a collision in a 256-bit hash like SHA-256, a classical computer using the best-known attack, the birthday attack, would theoretically need around 2,128 operations. A quantum computer using Grover's could potentially do it in roughly the square root of that, around 264 operations. Similarly, for finding a preimage, finding the input given the hash, the classical difficulty is about 2,256 operations, while Grover's reduces that to roughly 228 quantum operations. Now, while a reduction from 2128 to 264 or 2256 to 2128 is a very significant theoretical degradation in security strength, it's crucial to understand that this is not considered an immediate catastrophic break like SHA's algorithm is for RSA-ECC. Security levels like 2128, which is what Grover leaves us with for SHA-256 preimage resistance, are still considered computationally infeasible for the foreseeable future, even for quantum computers. The sheer number of stable, error-corrected qubits required to run Grover's algorithm effectively at that scale is enormous and likely many years, possibly decades away. So, while quantum computers do weaken hash functions, they don't completely break them in the same way they break current public key crypto. One common mitigation strategy is simply to increase the hash output size. For instance, using SHA-512 provides a classical preimage resistance of 2512, which Grover's would reduce to 2256, a level considered secure against all known classical and quantum attacks for the very long term. Doubling the hash length effectively squares the security against Grover's attack.
That's a relief, somewhat. But the threat is real enough that NIST has been proactively working on this for years with their post-quantum cryptography PQC standardization process, right? Recognizing this potential future threat, NIST launched a global competition to develop and standardize new cryptographic algorithms for both public key encryption key exchange and digital signatures that are believed to be resistant to attacks from both classical and quantum computers.
It's been a massive international effort involving cryptographers from academia and industry worldwide. NIST recently announced the first set of standardized PQC algorithms. The key principle guiding this selection was algorithmic diversity. They didn't want to put all their eggs in one mathematical basket. So the first standards include algorithms based on different families of mathematical problems believed to be hard for quantum computers. We have schemes based on structured lattices, like Crystal's Kyber for key establishment and Crystal's dilithium for signatures. These are generally quite efficient. But critically, NIST also chose to standardize a signature scheme based on a completely different foundation, hash-based signatures. The standard is called SLHDSA, which stands for Stateless Hash-Based Digital Signature Algorithm, and it's based on the Sphinx Plus submission to the competition.
Okay, these hash-based signatures like Sphinx plus SLHDSA sound particularly interesting in the context of our discussion. Their security isn't based on factoring or lattices. It's fundamentally rooted in the security of the underlying cryptographic hash functions themselves, like SHA-256 or SHA-3 variants. This makes them orthogonal, right? Meaning they rely on totally different mathematical assumptions than the lattice-based schemes. Why is having this kind of diversity so important as we move into the post-quantum era?
Their orthogonal nature is a huge strength. Think of it as a crucial backup plan. If someday an unexpected breakthrough happens and someone finds an efficient quantum algorithm to break lattice-based cryptography, which is currently considered unlikely but not impossible, hash-based signatures would likely remain secure because their security relies only on the well-understood difficulty of breaking hash functions. Now, Hash-based signatures like SLHDSA do come with certain trade-offs. Their main drawbacks are signature size. The signatures themselves are significantly larger, often tens of kilobytes, compared to just a few kilobytes for dilithium or even smaller for classical signatures. This can impact network bandwidth and storage requirements. They are also generally slower to generate signatures compared to lattice-based schemes. But despite these performance trade-offs, their inclusion in the PQC standards is absolutely critical. They provide that vital non-lattice backup, an essential insurance policy for scenarios where maximum long-term security assurance is the absolute top priority and performance is a secondary concern. Think about things like signing the firmware for critical infrastructure or securing root certificate authority certificates that might need to remain valid and trustworthy for decades. For those use cases, the robustness and conservative security assumptions of hash-based signatures, directly leveraging the proven strength of hashes against quantum attacks via Grovers, not Shors, offer a massive advantage and provide resilience even if other PQC candidates were to falter unexpectedly in the future.
Wow, the future of hashing is truly fascinating. We're navigating these exciting but also really challenging waters of quantum computing. It's clearly not just about protecting today's data anymore, but actively future-proofing it against threats that are only just beginning to materialize on the horizon. It sounds like a really complex migration path for organizations to navigate.
It absolutely is, and it raises a really important question for you, the listener, to ponder. As we inevitably migrate our systems to this post-quantum world, what data do you personally or your organization possess today that absolutely must remain secure and confidential for decades to come? How does that harvest now, decrypt later threat, targeting today's encrypted data with tomorrow's quantum computers, impact your understanding of current security practices and the urgency of adopting PQC? It's a challenge that's going to require foresight, very careful planning, and a nuanced understanding of risk from everyone involved, from individuals to global enterprises, as we collectively redefine what secure truly means in the looming quantum era. Many organizations are already starting to explore hybrid approaches, using both current algorithms and new PQC algorithms simultaneously during a transition period to manage this complexity and risk. Outro.
And there you have it, a deep dive into the secure hash algorithm. We've journeyed from its fundamental principles, like one-wayness and the avalanche effect, through its dynamic evolution, the fall of SHA-1, the rise of the robust SHA-2, and the innovative diversity-driven SHA-3. We've seen how this seemingly simple concept of a digital fingerprint underpins digital trust in so many ways, enabling everything from secure passwords and website connections to the decentralized consensus of blockchain.
Yeah, and we've seen how this continuous arms race against cryptanalysis, driven also by regulatory needs and powerful economic forces, constantly pushes hashing technology forward. Even as these potentially disruptive quantum threats loom large, the cryptographic community isn't abandoning hash functions. Quite the opposite. They're leveraging their proven strength, particularly their resistance to Shor's algorithm, as a foundational building block for new quantum-resistant signature schemes. It really demonstrates their enduring relevance and remarkable adaptability as a cornerstone of digital security now and into the future.
So based on everything we've discussed today, we can pull together some clear, actionable recommendations for secure hashing practices that you can apply, whether you're a developer, a system administrator, or just an informed user. First and foremost, the message has to be loud and clear. Avoid SHA-1. Do not use SHA-1 for any new applications, especially anywhere collision resistance is important, like digital signatures. Its vulnerabilities are known, practical, and simply too significant to ignore in 2025.
Instead, embrace SHA-2 and SHA-3. SHA-256 and the other SHA-2 variants remain strong, reliable choices for most current applications and are widely deployed and understood. SHA-3 offers that robust, length extension-resistant alternative, providing crucial algorithmic diversity for our overall cryptographic health. It's an excellent choice for new systems. And please remember, when using SHA-2 for message authentication codes, MACs, always employ an HMA construction. That wrapper is crucial to mitigate those inherent length extension vulnerabilities in the underlying Merkle-Damgård structure. It's not just SHA-2, it's a HMAC SHA-2 for MX. That's a critical implementation detail.
Absolutely. And for password best practices, we really can't stress this enough. This isn't optional. It's mandatory for anyone building or managing systems that handle user credentials. Always use salting, a unique random salt for every single password hash. And always use key stretching, iterating the hash function thousands of times. Salting protects against rainbow table attacks, making bulk password cracking much harder. Key stretching adds significant computational cost, making brute force attacks against individual hashes much more expensive and time-consuming for adversaries. adversaries. These steps are absolutely fundamental to protecting user accounts effectively.
And finally, a clear call to action, particularly for organizations handling sensitive data with long-term confidentiality requirements. Prepare for quantum. You must begin planning and strategizing your transition to post-quantum cryptography standards now. That harvest now, decrypt later threat makes this an urgent imperative, not some distant sci-fi concern. Hash-based signature schemes like SLH-DSA, SFINI-CS+, offer critical, conservative, long-term assurance for the most sensitive data, and exploring hybrid cryptographic approaches during the transition is a prudent step for managing risk and complexity. Don't wait until it's too late.
The story of hashing is clearly far from over. It's a highly active area of research, constantly adapting to new threats, new attacks, and new computational advancements. It's ensuring its enduring role as a truly foundational component in securing our increasingly digital world for decades to come. We hope you feel a little more well-informed after this deep dive and maybe a bit more ready to spot those digital fingerprints working behind the scenes.
Absolutely. And I think this whole journey shows that the future of cybersecurity isn't really about finding a single, mystical, perfect solution that lasts forever. It's about continuous adaptation, embracing diverse strategies, building layered defenses, and fostering an ongoing commitment to critical thinking about how our digital world is constructed and secured. So as you go about your digital day after listening to this, maybe consider this. If SHA is one piece of the invisible glue holding our digital trust together, what other invisible technologies are equally critical? And how deeply do we really need to understand them to navigate our complex, connected world securely and make informed decisions about our digital lives?